Well, a very warm welcome to the next episode of Property Developers and Investors Podcast. And I'm delighted that we're going to be welcoming a fantastic guest, runs an amazing company. And I know many of our viewers and listeners use their products and tools on a day-to-day basis. So a very warm welcome to the co-founder of Nimbus Maps, Mr. Paul Davis. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Mark. How are you doing?
Very well indeed. Thank you. Very well. Been really looking forward to this podcast. We know each other quite well, and our businesses interact, and so do our mentees on a regular basis. But more of Nimbus Maps a little bit later on. But maybe if you could just give yourself just a brief 1-minute introduction of the life and times of Paul, and then we can maybe dig into some of your business background.
Yeah, sure. So Nimbus is an online tool, basically helps you find opportunities, basically. So investors, developers use it, typically big agents, big retailers, people like that, pub companies, this sort of stuff, to go and find their next property opportunity, basically. So it helps you find stuff, assess whether it works, and then work out kind of how best to interact with that owner to try and buy it or rent it or whatever you might be doing, really. So that's kind of our core focus.
Brilliant. So when did you found, because you're the co-founder, so when did you found Nimbus Maps? When did that idea and concept first come about?
Well, so it's kind of a bit of a long story, actually, but I'll give you the brief pot history of it. So back in 2012, we were doing a piece of work for one of the big pub companies in sort of the middle bit of our journey, which we'll probably talk about later. But we were basically trying to find opportunities in a pub estate on behalf of the pub company, which worked really well. And we were using kind of data to kind of help us work out where those opportunities were. And I sort of stumbled across one of the thoughts I was going through my head at the time is, could I work out how big a site was? Kind of one of the key requirements we had was that a site had to be over 1/4 of an acre to get a convenience store on it, like a little Tesco's Express or something. And so I stumbled across a data set that sort of towards the end of the project, which meant I couldn't use it in the particular project, but it sort of bubbled along in my mind. This was back in 2012. And so sort of 10 years ago, the idea of, could I possibly do this sort of thing sort of started to evolve. And it sort of took us a number of years before we then got a project where we had to go and measure a site, in effect, measure a whole bunch of sites automatically from the name and address of the property, in effect. So can you tell us how big this pub is with just the name and address of it? And sounds like you can't, but it turns out you can, and we managed to. And then that sort of then meant we started plotting titles on maps and this sort of stuff as part of that piece of work. And we sort of looked at that's quite interesting and sort of carried on, really. So the idea came in 2012. We were using quite a lot of technology that we now use in Nimbus in that kind of 2012 review. But then the real kind of Nimbus as it is at the moment, that really kind of started to form in that 2015, really. Sold our first license 2015.
Yeah, so it was born out of identifying an opportunity in the market and actually identifying a different tool set that you might need that didn't exist in the market.
Yeah. Well, it was really kind of our own problem. So it was our own issue we were trying to fix for our clients. And we thought, well, actually, if we could do that, we could streamline some of the stuff we were doing. We could then sell them sort of more cost effectively. Because the main problem we had with that marketplace was, if you think about a pub company, they've got thousands of assets and they're all worth 200, 300, 400, £500,000. So they're huge portfolios. But if you start saying, I want to go and charge you £2,000 for a valuation report, suddenly you multiply it by 5,000 and it's a big fee, And so trying to get that fee signed off is really difficult. So that if you could bring that price right down, then you could sort of get under the skin of these estates and start unlocking deals for them and unlock fees in different ways, really. So that was typically the reason for it, really.
Got it. So you mentioned that, that was over a decade ago now, working with commercial real estate portfolios. Can we wind back even further and understand what your business background is and property? That'd be interesting.
Yeah. I suppose kind of right back at the start. So I went to university, did engineering, which is completely irrelevant to kind of life going forward, really. And then when I finished university, I started working with the family. So the family got a sort of property portfolio. So it was kind of just a portfolio of commercial properties, basically. And there was quite a lot of opportunity in it. There was quite a lot of change of use, improvements, refurbishment stuff we could do. So we sort of started doing that really just as sort of almost fell into it, really. And then as we kind of moved through that journey, we started developing and investing and then refurbishing and changing use and this sort of stuff to try and drive value into some of the sites we'd got. And we just stumbled on a requirement on one of our sites for Sainsbury's that we couldn't fit on, and so we ended up in effect hitting the pub company. There was a pub company that owned a property over the road that, so we'll try and put it on there, and we got restricted covenants. We'd sort of try and make that work really. And then, cut a long story short, that did work. And we then sort of started doing more and more of it. So we did one site for them, then 100, then 1,000, then 10,000, and it kind of just sort of snowballed in effect with the opportunity they got, and sort of going from one pub company to the next and trying to do the same sort of stuff for each of them. And that then pushed us at data basically. So I suppose started career 2002, so 20 years ago. About 8 to 10 years after that, we started doing this work with the pub companies, and that's when we really started doing sort of the large scale reviews basically. And kind of in truth, that's when we sort of around, I guess, 2008, we started doing our own stuff. So we started investing our own stuff, and then at the same time had this consulting business we sort of set up and doing these joint ventures with pub companies and stuff. And then roll the clock forward to 2015, Nimbus evolved, and we sort of put that stuff to one side, and now full on tech. So.
Yeah, and I'm fascinated by business, and I know we both are. How did you find that transition from working with a series of clients on a family-based portfolio, commercial real estate, to growing a property tech company? You know, a very different type of organization, albeit with similar data sets maybe. I mean, that's a big change on how to fund and drive that business growth.
Yeah, so I suppose there's kind of three parts. The early part, which was, family investments and this sort of stuff, which was typical kind of, sitting in the client seat, making decisions, doing the I suppose calling the shots, if you like. And then into the consulting business where you're the one having the shots called at you, which I found that quite tricky, actually. I found that sometimes the client wouldn't necessarily make the right decision, or they had ulterior motives that perhaps I wasn't party to, and this sort of stuff that I found quite tricky. And of course, at that point, you're also, I suppose, when you first set up your own business, you're at that sort of stage of investing rather than necessarily reaping the rewards of it. And then when some of those decisions go against you and the client wants to do something else with the asset, when you think, well, it's clearly the wrong thing to do, and your fees are on the line and you've been investing in your business to try and get it going, those times I think are really, really tricky, really. And then sort of moving into the technology, what we found was that actually, I think the thing that's interesting about us, rather than necessarily our ability to unlock a scheme or a building, or to acquire something, or build something cheaper, we're not anything different from anything else around that. We're employing the same subcontractors, we're getting the same builders in, we're using the same architects and planners and this sort of stuff. And so I think we had some relationships, which is kind of interesting. But then I think the thing that was really interesting for us was our ability to understand the technology and how we could leverage that to drive efficiencies. And I guess then the big question came was, well, do you keep that for yourself and have that as your USP for your consultancy business, or do you release it more widely? And we took the difficult decision to say we should release it more widely, rather than keep it for yourself, which is difficult because you're trading off that kind of IP effect, and that was what would kind of make us interesting to our clients and stuff. And so we took that difficult decision.
Yeah. It takes it into all different kinds of areas, doesn't it? Which all that business acumen and experience, holds you good for. But the growth, and of course, since 2015, not a great deal's happened in the economy, has it? No, Brexit and COVID. It's been.
Well, we set up the consultancy business just as credit crunch hit. So I guess we're sort of fairly used to that idea of all that. It's sort of uncertainty, I think, it's just a thing of business. There's always something that's happening, and it's just, you just get used to it, don't you? And I think you get used to the fact that it's not going to be as bad as you think it's going to be. And so you just got to kind of take a few deep breaths, think a bit, and get on with it, really, haven't you? So. Yeah,
and many of the listeners on the Property Developers and Investors podcast, they're in business, right? If you're in property, you're in business. Many of them have got service businesses, trading businesses, and they understand all the dynamics and challenges of growth and employing people. Any particular challenges that you've had to meet head on in growing your businesses over the years that you think would be of value to our listeners?
I think we've all got challenges, I think is the thing. And I think that's the bit that I think is the advice that I'd give, is that you think you're so like you think that your problems are your own and you're the only person with those problems. And then as soon as you speak to other people, you go, oh yeah, I've got the same problem. Yeah. I got, exact same seat as you. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. And so I find that kind of really helpful as a thing to remember, is that as the new problem arrives, and there's always problems, there's kind of everywhere you look, there's always problems.
Yeah.
And it's whether, they're just different problems depending on where you are, just kind of different challenges. But I think that's kind of worth remembering, is that usually you're seeing these problems because everybody does at that point when you're in that journey, in effect. And so it's I think it's just taking a deep breath and remembering that each time, and getting on with it and dealing with it and moving on to the next one, really. So next one's around the corner. It's just when, isn't it?
Well, I've certainly found myself. It's we all make mistakes over the years and learn from them. But I remember back in 99, 2000, 2001, the dot-com boom and bust cycle. Then, of course, the credit crunch hit in 2008, 2009. Just pretending, you're just lying to yourself if you're pretending everything's fine. But finding I suppose you could call it an informal mastermind or an inner circle of working with people, sharing business challenges and opportunities as well. It works both ways. And just sharing out, and it just opens out. I think you find that bit of law of attraction, really. You find other people who have an affinity to those kind of situations, been through it before, and can really help. And business can be pretty lonely, can't it? When you're a business owner, MD, CEO, whatever, that's a lonely place to be, a leadership role. Absolutely.
And I think kind of the right people, if you share these things with the right people, they typically have a very useful perspective to say, well, yes, when I found that problem, this is what I did, and I got it wrong, or I got it right, or and this is what I learned from it and stuff. And I think, I suppose the other bit is it's not being afraid to make mistakes, and then try not to beat yourself about them. If you make a mistake and you learn from it and you move on, and it's very hard not to beat yourself over that. But I find that it's not a healthy thing to do, to go and look back at mistakes you made and go, why did I make that mistake? I think it's useful just to learn from it and move on, really.
Well, exactly. It makes us more rounded business individuals, authentic. And let's face it, Nimbus Maps, it provides solutions to people's problems. I mean, it was born out of providing solutions for your own problems. So you very much walk a mile in other people's shoes, aren't you, as we like to say?
Absolutely. So, and I've stolen that, actually. That whenever I use that walk a mile in someone's shoes, I always put your name next to it, actually. But I do like it as a concept. I think it's a great thing to do. It's I think if you can empathise with your customers' problems, you're halfway there, aren't you, really? So
absolutely, 100%. So let's dive into a bit more in terms of Nimbus Maps, because I know industry wide, so many people are reliant on this tool to help solve their problems and grow their business. And here we are heading out of 22 into 23, where the economy is in bits all over the place, but there are a significant amount of opportunities there. And sometimes we need to look at property and technology to work out what those problems are. So could you just illustrate to us and our listeners some of the key advantages, what your business does, how it helps solve the problems that people are finding, and uncover these opportunities?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose it's the same thing. Just talk about kind of walking a mile in my shoes, really. So we have a sort of quite a long history of walking in those shoes, and know how painful they can be at some points. And so we sort of, I think what we try to do is try to think about the marketplace. And I think one of the benefits we have is that we haven't got the day-to-day clutter of doing deals and doing developments and this sort of stuff, and the kind of the very transactional nature of all of that, because you get very close to a deal, and every deal's different and every property's different. And so it can be quite hard when you're at that level of granularity to then sort of stand back and sort of think strategically about a marketplace. And so I think we're quite lucky in that respect, because we're not so close to each individual deal and not clouded by the kind of the detail around each one. And so where I think this is kind of interesting at the moment is that there's things like energy performance is such a big thing at the moment, and sort of being able to relet buildings and not being able to relet certain buildings and this kind of stuff. And I think what's interesting is that it's not very well understood, and and I think because of that, people then start to think about their portfolios in different ways, and sort of we do still hold some assets, and those sort of, when you're sort of talking about what you should do with them, it doesn't take much to say, well, actually, maybe now is the right time to sell it. And so when you start looking at a building and going, well, actually, it's EPCE, and I'm probably letting this building in due course. There's a bit of a term left on the lease, and maybe we should just kind of, when the tenant's kind of talking about maybe leaving, or is only kind of half occupying it since COVID and this sort of stuff. Some of that stuff is then really kind of interesting. And so I think there's what we try to do at Nimbus is try to think about what those opportunities are and try to think strategically around all of that, and then engage with many people as we can to understand kind of what they're seeing, so we can sort of stand back and say, well, actually, this is where we see that opportunity, and kind of here's why, because so-and-so has been saying this, and that's being replicated over here in a different way by somebody else, and that then kind of creates this opportunity to say, well, then based on that, how do you exploit it? How do you take that as a strategy, if you like, and then go and explore it? And then I think what's then really useful is then being able to prove it. And so we can come up with these, we're hearing this, we're hearing that, and this is what we think the opportunity is based on that. And here's a bunch of sites that kind of have those same characteristics, where you can probably persuade the owner now is a good time to be selling it on terms that work for you, and that probably has a bit in it for them as well. And really then kind of unlock those opportunities. And so you can then say, well, this is where we think the opportunity is. This is kind of where the marketplace is leading everything to. And then you can go and tap into that marketplace and say, well, based on that, here you go, here's some sites, write to a whole load of owners, see what reaction you get from them. If you're getting the kind of reaction you're expecting, happy days, do more. If you're not, you can pivot, come back and say, well, let's try something different and see what else is out there. I think it's kind of always very interesting as well, because the UK I find is very interesting, because there's London and the Southeast and that marketplace. There's kind of the Midlands and the East and sort of the Southwest, and then you've kind of got Wales and Scotland, and there's kind of three markets, and it's almost like a ripple effect outside of London. Actually, it's kind of sad, but it sort of is true. And I find that, so the property market I found in the last 20 years, I found is very cyclical. And so stuff we were doing 20 years ago, sort of 10 years ago, we were doing the opposite. And kind of the opposite example of that was back in 2002, where we are in the Midlands. You could convert residential to offices. Offices were worth more than residential were around here. Of course, now it's resi to offices. Now it's the opposite around, offices to resi rather. But actually in some parts of the country it's not. So in Manchester, for example, it's the opposite. You can still convert resi to office, because the office market is so strong. And so sort of the UK's kind of got different pockets of different kind of, the pendulums in different places. It's kind of swinging backwards and forwards from one type of thing to another thing, and back the other way again, and then back again. And so sort of watching that happen in sort of as that pendulum swing different places across the UK is, I find really fascinating, really. So
yeah, it is. And it takes different, sometimes national events, sometimes global events to bring them to a head. I mean, I remember, must have been 15 to 17 years ago, we were doing a lot of work in renewable energy, and ESG governance was something that was being heavily promoted, and we adopted that as part of our strategy. And that's environmental, social and governance, for those listeners who are not aware of ESG. But you can see from how government are putting pressure now down into the property market to decarbonise the property market. In fact, I heard the other day that by 2050, all the properties that exist in the UK, 80% of them already exist today. So we're not going to be greening the economy and greening the UK's real estate industry by building better homes. It's going to be predominantly through refurbishing better homes. But sorry, it sounds like a bit of a ramble, but getting to the point of how government policy is driving down change into the funding market and that ripple effect. We recently had commercial terms, let's say it was development finance at 8%. But if we went from an EPC-C to an EPC-B rating, then they would drop 1.25%.
Wow.
No, that's a big impact. I mean, that creates almost like a sink fund, doesn't it, to drive air source heat pumps or whatever it is to drive down performance. Now, we know where that came. That wasn't necessarily from development finance feeling good about greening the economy. They were using stimulated funds from government. But So the tools that you have available for your users to be able to identify energy upgrade potential, I mean, must be a staggering opportunity.
Well, this is what, and I think, as I say, the lack of understanding of it as well is what I think kind of excites me about it as well, because can that building be relet or not? Well, the owner's sitting there going, I don't know. And what will it cost to fix it? I don't know. But somebody's approached me to buy it off me, and they're going to make some savings, they're going to change the use into something else. Feels like a good time, isn't it? My interest rate's just gone up. I've got a higher mortgage cost now than I had before. And so that whole picture that's being painted, maybe now's top of the markets, and maybe now's time is, and so all these kind of things that you can kind of dwell on as a developer and just sort of plant the seeds in the owner's minds just means that now's gonna be a really interesting time to do all of that. And I think I think it's a fascinating time, frankly. I really do. I think it's a really kind of interesting time to be targeting this stuff.
Yeah. So moving on to 2023, I'll say there's a lot of shit and derision in the industry if you listen to the tabloids, which of course most of us don't. But the opportunity, we've mentioned energy there, and you've also mentioned that shift in dynamics between residential, office, and office prices as well, and driving scarcity. Where do you see, from interaction you've had with your clientele, where do you see opportunities emerging for many of the property developers and investors listening in for 2023? So
I think it's all over the place, frankly, isn't it? I think the right scheme will get funded, and the right scheme still stacks regardless of the market conditions. So I think it depends what you're after, really. I think low density sheds feels like an obvious one to say, doesn't it? We're having a little play with something sort of in the background that we think is kind of super interesting, which is very similar to that resi to office thing that we talked about. We'll kind of leave it there, but we're having a little play at something. We're going to launch a little sort of video series about kind of us trying to be silly but clever, and trying to create some opportunity out of stuff that doesn't look like it should be an opportunity. So we're going to sort of talk about some of that, but so I think there's kind of lots of opportunities for sheds to sheds, lots of EVs, drive-throughs, convenience stores, all that kind of stuff is super hot at the moment, kind of pardon the pun. There's kind of all of that stuff that still will remain kind of interesting. There's lots of requirements out there at the moment for all that sort of stuff. I still think there's a lot of opportunity for the commercial conversions. I think that's sort of the SME property investor that's got a grade F tired old office building in the centre of town somewhere with no parking and this sort of stuff. It's the wrong use in that location nowadays, and actually moving that into a grade B block of flats or something like that does feel like the sort of a very obvious thing to be doing. And so I think repurposing infrastructure. We're not doing the larger ones quite so much at the moment. Keep the concentration risk down. But our latest one should complete just before Christmas, and it's a relatively old and tired guest house, and we're converting that to 6 apartments. Yeah. The location is just absolutely stunning, but just quite small. Retired couple. Sadly, one of them has passed away. But you could just see how that type of asset class loses its relevance in today's society. So we're repurposing it to another asset class. And I think the right scheme, any market conditions, the right scheme at the right price does that. And I think now with the uncertainty in the marketplace, you can very easily persuade an owner that they should be sharing the risk with you, because the marketplace, it's not my fault, it's the marketplace, isn't it? It's like it's an obvious thing to be doing, and any owner that's kind of not prepared to do that is probably going to be difficult to deal with down the line anyway. And so I think that's kind of where there's quite a lot of opportunity, really. I think kind of in previous marketplaces that opportunity to kind of to walk away from a deal, I think was something that I really struggled with. So back in the day, sort of pre-Nimbus and this sort of stuff, before letter campaigning and sort of going direct to owners and this sort of stuff, where before you've got an agent that's brought you this deal and you're like, well, it sort of stacks up, but only if I kind of trim my profit down. I've got to make sure I kind of engineer every last penny out of the build, and it sort of stacks up. I can kind of make 22% out of it. Probably shouldn't, but go on, then I will. That sort of stuff we never made any money out of. It's like and we should never really have done it, but we had nothing else really to put our money into. And so so I think nowadays that the marketplace is very different for that, because now you can, go and choose the stuff that generally works, and when it generally works, it does, and either you're sharing the risk in the right way, or the price is the right price to know you can get a really good margin out of it regardless of what happens. And I think that's where the right deal always gets stacked up. The right deal stacks and it gets funded because it stacks. And I think that's what I think is different about today's marketplace, and I think it's kind of really kind of helpful to hold yourself accountable to that. It's so easy to go, well, I've done a lot of work on this and it sort of works, and I'll sort of just go and do it. And that's where the big red flag, the siren should be going, or the alarm should be going off really in your head that it's time.
Takes a lot of humility and personal discipline to walk away from a deal, or not to try and make that deal work under any circumstances, particularly if you've got a few £1,000 of seed capital out the door on it.
Certainly.
But I think we've all got a tale to tell on that one over the years. But
quite, and a tale to tell, and probably a few scars as well is the thing, isn't it? But
that's generally what it leads to. That's for sure. Okay, so certainly speed is crucial. Has been. I look at all of our developments over the last sort of 7 or 8 years. And the consistent factor is being able to access data, move quickly. And I've had the privilege of seeing you do some live demonstrations, and somebody will literally just call out any location in the country. I don't know, it could be Chester, Northampton, Norwich, wherever. And you literally use the systems, go in there, identify a strategy, subsectors of data. And I just find that absolutely fascinating, how technology enables us to do what we're great at. And that must be one of the significant advantages you see and probably still use yourself on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I suppose if you kind of cast your mind back in the days of sort of helping pub companies and sort of middle part of our journey, we always had that problem. We always had that problem where here's just a list of pubs, and tell me what's in there. And so you're sort of forever trying to work out what is that marketplace around that particular property. And it's kind of interesting because we had to basically sweat down what gut feel was, what is gut feel, and what is local knowledge, and kind of and what is it. And so we asked ourselves lots of questions around all of that, and that's really kind of where a lot of the stuff in Nimbus has come from. Is sort of saying, well, actually, I need to know, is this a good part of town or a bad part of town? And actually, if I'm going to consider doing some decent resi there, then it's got to be a good part. And if it's not, then we had the odd embarrassing conversation with clients. We're saying, well, we think you should put some residential on this site, and then they go, but it's the worst part of town, and someone around the corner got stabbed recently or something. You're like, well, didn't know that, So you I need to know that for next time, don't we? Kind of need to kind of make sure our process deal with that before we kind of do this now. And so yeah, we sort of I find that really interesting, trying to understand that little local marketplace, and it can be very, very embarrassing as well, because there's a really interesting story. So back in I guess it's about 2010 we were doing this. In fact, no, 2008, because it was credit crunch. So we were acquiring some stuff in a local town, Leamington Spa. And basically we had this model where we'd bought a building historically, and we've got some empty space, like shops and uppers basically, and we carved the other parts off to HMO to the university. We thought, God, that's a great deal. It's like we did really well. We strengthened the upper parts. We got the same rent on the ground floor to the national retailer, and then we got space back, and we were letting that, and we were making 25 grand a year out of it or whatever, and it cost us 100 grand to refurbish, whatever. And it's a brilliant strategy. Let's go and buy some more, So we went off and started trying to acquire more properties, and we bought another 2 to do the same thing on. But we thought we were so clever because we got this end occupier. We could do a pre-let to the university, would take it off plan from us, pay us a rent, take a 2 or 3 year loan, lease off us. We could then get a bit of bank finance on the back of it. Happy days, It's like it was sort of license to print money, and so we thought that was really clever. And then when you then look at it through the lens of the sort of the right data sets, in effect, with Nimbus, you put on the HMO overlay, and you go, oh, there's loads of HMOs all around there. It's like, oh, wonder if that's a strategy we should be thinking about. And you put the planning layer on, and it's like, oh, there's a whole bunch of planning applications to change use. So that's like, everyone's doing it, Paul. It's like you're late to the party, kid, And so it's like, you think you're being so clever. In actual fact, you're not. It's just what our local market is. But you've never kind of managed to tap into it because of the relationships you had and the way in which you kind of dealt with stuff. And so I find that fascinating, really, in terms of just seeing what that local knowledge is, and just it's all sat there, it's just knowing where to look for it, really. So
yeah, exactly. Well, one strategy I know a lot of people are looking into is supported living. And that's something we're looking at, and we're about 15% into our target of 10 million homeless bed nights now.
Of course, yeah.
By the end of the year, we should be at 2 million homeless bed nights. So that's going really well. But that's a challenge for many to get their head around that, because that's not just about property. It's bringing a lot of constructs together, isn't it? Relationships, contracts, securitized income. But again, the multiple asset classes that can be deployed through supported living. I've seen your overlays, whether that be HMOs, whether that be buy-to-lets, commercial to residential conversion, and the list goes on. Again, it really just heightens the power of accessibility of data and being able to seize the opportunities quickly, absolutely, decisively.
And I think kind of what we're particularly keen on here at Nimbus is kind of having our ear to the ground around all of that. And ideally, at some point, we'll have code that's keeping its ear to the ground for us to understand what those emerging trends are, so we can understand that and then help share that as part of it. But that's really kind of what I find really interesting, is that there will be kind of breadcrumbs left within the marketplace that sort of show, well, actually, this is what these buildings are being used for, and how they're being moved on, and really being able to understand what that means, whether it's a change of use or it's a particular occupier coming into the marketplace and taking new leases or whatever it is. That's what I think is really interesting.
Yeah, the fascinating one for me is de-risking the whole process of development, repurpose, re-engineering real estate. And with supported living, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity, because ultimately, let's say the standard product is a one-bed apartment. The one-bed apartment that is through supported living, assuming it's a commercial to residential, the whole construct of the finance changes. And reduces the risk, increases the leverage, reduces the risk to the developer. It's still a one-bed apartment, but because of the principal end user, absolutely, the whole funding stack changes. Absolutely. Risk to the developer decreases. The enablement, and this is the catalytic part of the environment that helps create that shared value, that deep societal value. Absolutely. And I think those that can grasp that concept will have a fantastic 2023 and many years beyond, because that truly is a game-changing environment.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's pre-let, isn't it? It just takes all the risk out of the game for it, isn't it, really? So yeah, love it.
It certainly does. Now, one question we always like to close with is, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Just one. I think I've got a few bits of things I think I would tell myself, but I'm just trying to work out which ones are right to say today. I think there's probably the stuff I've said today actually around kind of making sure that you're I suppose being prepared to walk the right place in your own shoes, I think, and sort of knowing who you are and what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it, I think. And I think setting your own goals is very useful. I think I was probably not very good at that sort of back in the very early days. Sort of knowing where you're trying to get to, who you are, why you care about what you care about, and sort of and what your true values are, and sort of holding yourself completely true to those. I think that's I think mine haven't changed. I just don't think I've ever wrote them down at the time and said, right, this is kind of what it means. So I think some of that stuff is, sort of about that sort of longer term strategic approach to life, knowing that it is finite. And certainly a few things I've been going through recently sort of made me very aware of the fact life is finite, rather than when you're in your 20s, it feels like it's infinite, doesn't it? And I think it's not anymore. And so I think some of that stuff is important, really. But slightly waffly, that I think is an answer. But I think what I would kind of say to my younger self is think about that stuff.
That's some really deep wisdom there, Paul. Really deep wisdom. I agree. So those of you out there who would like to understand how you can accelerate your property journey, identify properties into 2023, I'd really encourage you to get in contact with Paul and the fantastic team at Nimbus Maps. Paul, guide us. How would people best get hold of you and maybe have a demo or understand how your systems can help their strategy?
Yeah, sure. So www.nimbusmaps.co.uk is our website. You can have a demonstration on there. There's a big button in the middle just to click on that and get in touch with the team. They'll be able to show you the system, show you kind of how it works. We run weekly webinars where we host lots of guests like yourself, Mark, obviously been on many of them. We just talk about industry problems and try to show how the system can kind of help as part of that and help sort of unlock the opportunities that we're seeing or solve the problems that we're seeing and this sort of stuff. So again, and those are all on the website too. So feel free to drop on there and feel free to jump onto one of the webinars and come see us.
That's brilliant. Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Lots of golden nuggets there that will help people enable their 2023 vision and beyond. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Thank you.